You're listening to a Life in Quebec podcast. For more, visit lifeinquebec.com.
Hi, I'm Andrew Greenfield from lifeinquebec.com, and this is week 8 of Election Perspectives, where we're discussing the Canadian federal election 2015. I'm joined tonight with Guy Bergeron, who ran as a Bloc Québécois candidate in the 2008 federal election in Lévis-Bellechasse, and I'm joined by Colin Standish, who was a Liberal Party prospective nominee for this year's election but didn't quite make it, unfortunately for him. But fortunately for us, Colin's with us tonight, and both of these guys are political science graduates and really interested in what's going on in the current election. So, gentlemen, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. I'm sure I'm talking on behalf of Colin.
Okay, so first question then, and Guy, we'll start with you actually, seeing as though it's in your native language. What were your impressions of last week's leaders' debate in French?
Well, the word cacophonic, I think, is inevitable. Unfortunately, Anne-Marie Dussault lost control very early during the debate, and at some point, I almost felt like Gilles Duceppe, by the way that he was moving or how he was addressing the issues, was almost being the moderator of this debate at some point, I would say. If I take candidate by candidate, what I thought about them, I would say that Elizabeth May, unfortunately, the language barrier didn't do her justice, because she really did a good performance and could have put some points or even put some of her candidates in Quebec in the lead. I think that the real leader in Quebec for the Green Party isn't Elizabeth May. It is André Bellil, who is writing in the former writing that I was candidate. If André Bellil would have been the DH designated editor for Elizabeth May for this debate, this would have been a different story for the Green Party. But she was much better than she did in her previous appearance, which was in 2008, if my memory is correct. So that's for Elizabeth May.
Okay, Colin, what did you think?
I had a different impression of the debate, actually. I felt Mr. Duceppe, to sort of go in the same logic as we were just discussing, I felt he had a poor showing, actually. I think he could have done much better. I don't think he's going to reverse the block slide electorally that I actually felt his body language very weak. And his final message at the end, he was sort of reading off a page on his lectern that I felt Mr. Duceppe, who's usually very animated, wasn't. I think Mr. Mulcair came across as sort of the angry Tom, as he's been branded as at times, that instead of coming across as the happy-go-lucky Jack Layton persona, I think Mr. Mulcair is a bit abrasive. I don't think he ingratiated himself to Quebecers in the way he should have. I think Mr. Trudeau, his charisma was obvious. He didn't stumble on any answers. Mr. Mulcair...
He has a plan.
Pardon me?
He has a plan.
He has a plan.
Oh, yeah.
I'll hear that. And I think, sorry, just to finish, Mr. Harper... I feel was sort of wooden, but he sort of wins by not losing. So he didn't, they didn't gang up on him. He was Mulcair was sort of the person to attack, it seemed, and I agree. But Elizabeth May, I felt it was a language barrier, as was mentioned before. It did sort of hinder her, but I think she had one of the best lines of the night. That she said the debate about niqabs and religious discrimination, that really it's a false debate. I think that was one of the most logical points of the night, so I give her kudos for that.
Guy, you were just going to finish off about the candidates you were talking about.
Yes, because I mainly spoke about Elizabeth May, and I agree she had a few good lines, but unfortunately they fell flat, because I'm sure that probably a very high percentage of the listeners here in Quebec didn't understand fully what she was saying, which is a shame, actually. But if I go back to Mr. Mulcair, I agree, we did saw Angry Tom, and I think Gilles Duceppe has probably two great zingers in this debate, and one of them is when he said, "Does Thomas talk to Tom from time to time?" Because one of the things in this campaign is that, I said this earlier on this microphone when I first went on this show, is that there are two identities across Canada. There's Thomas Mulcair in Quebec, and there's Tom Mulcair in Canada, and this is obvious for a lot of declarations, especially regarding the transport of tar sands oil that we have. He says one thing in Quebec and completely another thing in the rest of Canada, especially in BC, where there's no way that transport of tar sands oil will be allowed there. But here in Quebec, it's okay. So Thomas needs to talk to Tom, and I think Gilles Duceppe was straight on that level. Justin Trudeau, I agree with you. Great image. Poster guy, but he has a plan. What is the plan, basically, and how it will affect Quebec and the rest of Canada in so many ways? I will agree with you, Colin, he was terrific on the English debates, but in French, it was basically the poster guy that was there, and not much more. I think he could do better, but he will do probably better in 4 or 5 years. Then, Stephen Harper, a lot of those specialists that works in communications say that he was over the debate. But personally, what I think about Stephen Harper, I think he was a ghetto blaster. He was like, you could have had a technician with a radio pressing play and stop, and playing with the volume with a campaign poster, and it would have been exactly the same thing. It's like he wasn't there. He was just there to play the message. The only time that we could really see that he was kind of taken aback or participating real well is when Gilles Duceppe raised the Saudi Arabia issue and about selling arms to Saudi Arabia and the whole kind of terrorist aspect, and not Mulcair and not Trudeau to respond to this kind of not provocation but question, which brings a whole lot of issues about what Canada is becoming. And that's one of the main things that if only for that, Duceppe won this debate. Because a lot of Canadians right now are thinking we are allies with people who support terrorists.
Okay, so moving on to the second question. We can't include Elizabeth May or Gilles Duceppe in this because they weren't involved in the other debates. But did the topics and leaders' messages differ compared to the English debates that we've already heard? What do you think, Colin?
That's a great question. I mean, generally the topics seem, are similar: environment, economy. Also, Quebec constitutional status came up. Obviously, for the French debates, we hear more about the niqab and religious accommodation came up, and as well about the Quebec constitutional issue as well. So I felt on those issues, and I agree with what Guy said. Or what Duceppe had said, is that Mr. Mulcair and the NDP are saying two different things. One thing in the rest of Canada, one thing in Quebec. I've talked about this at length, and I think he picked up on it. Does Thomas talk to Tom? And it's certainly on the question of national unity with the Sherbrooke Declaration, Mr. Mulcair, he really is, sort of backed into a corner, and he's saying 50% plus one. Well, those are rules in 80 and 95, so we're institutionalizing it. However, it rejects the Supreme Court reference. It rejects the Clarity Act. It's actually not factually true that in 1980 and 95, had there been 50% plus one under the Referendum Act of Quebec, no percentage is acquiesced to, and of course the referendums in 1980 and 95 are not actually on the independence of Quebec. The first one was on something called Sovereignty Association, to be maybe eventually approved by a second referendum, and of course in 95 it was to enter into negotiations where you could ratify a bill eventually that might lead to something called sovereignty. So and then of course the logic is flawed if of course 50% plus one is enough to get a yes answer in any direction. Well, why is it just flipping the coin until you get the answer you want? Why aren't there definitive answers in 1995 and even 92 if you want to count Charlottetown Accord? So, of course, his logic was extremely flawed. And, as you know, my perspective certainly on the Sherbrooke referendum and the NDP's position on it, I find it a very hard pill to swallow. So,
why would 50% plus one would be okay for any kind of democratic endeavor and not for this one?
I mean, the logic is flawed for a variety of reasons. That, of course, we don't live in a pure democracy that majority rules all the time. Of course, we live in a constitutional monarchy that has, human rights and freedoms and is encompassed by the rule of law. So, of course, 50% plus one, and it's not even mentioned in Quebec's Referendum Act, that nowhere in the Referendum Acts or even the legislation surrounding 1980 and 95.
Well, isn't it the basis of democracy? So why a negation of democracy would be allowed to rule a people about taking their decision about it? And I think Duceppe made it very, very, very clear this time in the debate. And that's one thing that was never on the table before and is now. It's about the clarity of the question. Do you want Quebec to be an independent state? Yes or no? and there's no ambiguity there, and there will not be a flaw in logic and in any way. And also, we are taking example for what happened with Scotland, and we are asking. We are even more than which was never before, because the previous position by the bloc was that only Quebec has the right to settle the question. Now we are willing, and it is very clear, to discuss it with Ottawa about the question. We will say a question which has no ambiguity at all. Does Quebec want to be a sovereign and independent state? Not even more than sovereign, independent state. The rest is only business.
Okay, I think we've got to move on and try and get back on topic here. The niqab, oh my God, the niqab, it's been mentioned again. But why is it such a political hot potato when the number of women actually affected is so small? Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, so it's a consistent issue here in Quebec, and really the identity, the flames of that were sort of beat the drum of war under the last PQ government. There was obviously the Charter of Quebec Values and Religious Accommodation that came forward in 2014, and then or late 2013 rather, and was shot down by the electorate in the 2014 election. So it's a consistent issue, but really, I mean, there's less than 100 women that it affects in Quebec. But obviously, it's a false debate. I think Elizabeth May hit the nail on the head that there really is no connection between, the symbolism of one's clothing and it, not being to engage in civil society. I mean, the niqab and other face coverings, personally, they do make me feel, not necessarily comfortable. I was raised in a very small village, and it is very quote-unquote foreign to me, but however, if people feel that represents their best selves, their identity, their religion, and they want to externalize it in that way, and it doesn't intrinsically hurt me or anyone else, we shouldn't limit those rights and freedoms, right? So it's a false debate. We should really, if we're going to talk about targeting religion, that I think, I believe it was Mr. Mulcair who said, if we're worrying about oppression of women, well, let's actually go after the oppressors, right?
Okay, Guy, what do you say to that?
I agree, and I disagree. I think, well, first of all, the thing is that, and Mr. Duceppe once again said it very clearly, this debate is not about bringing a sexist aspect to it or bringing a religious aspect to it. It's about the equality of citizenship. And the thing is that it's not about the number of women who are actually affected by this debate. It's about every single citizen. A citizen is not only a female or a male. A citizen is a citizen. And the moment that you give some kind of qualification or you try to bring another aspect to the citizenship, then it isn't an equal an equal matter. And that's a problem. And that's why it's constitutional. That's the core of the problem. As soon as you quantify or you try to bring another aspect that will give some kind of categorization, it opens the door for anyone. If you take, and it's not about a religious thing, I would say, me personally, I have absolutely no problem about anyone going to vote with a hat or even a hijab or a Pastafarian passoir. I don't know what's in French. As long as the face is that you can identify it. It's not about religion. It's not about women. It's not even about that at all. And that's the thing. That's the problem with Stephen Harper and Mulcair, is that they are making a sexist issue, and that's not what we want about. It's about citizenship. Nothing more, nothing less.
Now, sticking with this for a while, there's a Facebook group out there in French at the moment called Je vote voilé, which is basically I'm going to vote veiled, I'm going to vote covered up. It's so far got nearly 8,000 members, and they're allegedly going to cover up their faces to vote on the 19th of October in the Canadian federal election. On this group, there's photographs of people going as Darth Vader. They've got potato sacks on their heads. They've got bags on their head. Colin, why has this Facebook group got so much support?
Yeah, no, it is quite funny to see that, and I appreciate you pointing it out. It came up. There's been many revisions to the Elections Act, but really in 2008, I remember it came up that the Conservatives were sort of talking to the head electoral officer at the time. I believe it was Jean-Pierre Kingsley, it was his name, if I recall. And they were sort of saying, veiled people can't vote, but it was never in the elections law. And he said, I'm going to enforce the Elections Act, which doesn't require that. So I think it's a great act of, not even civil disobedience, because if you're not breaking a law, but I think it's great to show solidarity with minorities who feel victimized by some of the propositions put forward that they should have to be unveiled. So I think it's a wonderful act of minor civil disobedience, and I would encourage anyone who wants to show their support for minorities who want to be fully engaged in civil society while at once expressing their religious values in a respectful way towards others. I think it's a wonderful movement.
Now, Guy, you're smiling and shaking your head. Why?
Well, it's about, that's the thing. It's about equality. I just said it before, and if someone, I will not say if it's a woman or a man, because if it's the person is wearing a piece of clothing that whose main function is to occult the face, then we don't need to say it's a woman or it's a man. It's someone that's occult. Even if the person identifies itself or we don't see it. And if the person refuses to reveal her face or his face for a moment, then it doesn't matter what the person is wearing. So if we have someone who shows up to vote or to give a prestation of public services or for its citizenship ceremony, wearing some kind of a white piece of clothing with a big mask with a pointy top and something, I don't agree with that. I don't want someone to show in some very serious ceremonies or very serious functions wearing a costume that occults the person for whatever reason. What does it say about the citizenship? What does it say about who we are as Canadians? Okay. It is important. It's not something that we have to take lightly. And if we say yes for one piece of clothing that occults, we have to say yes to all of them. All of them. Even those that are abject for the most horrific reason.
Okay, fair enough. So back to we're in the middle of a lengthy marathon of an election campaign. It's an 11-week campaign. We're talking about week 8. It's still anybody's race among the top 3, but how are the smaller parties faring? We saw them in the debate the other night, and the Bloc are obviously they're well represented in Quebec, but not in the rest of Canada for obvious reasons. But the smaller parties like the Bloc and the Greens, how are they faring at the moment? What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, no, so that's a great comment. I think Elizabeth May has done very well in the debates. I think that the Green Party really has gone from one very much on the fringe and sort of considered a marginal party to actually, they have a sophisticated branding, they have excellent policies, they have a real platform, they have a visible leader. I think it's unfortunate she's not been invited to all the debates. There's the Monk debate tomorrow in Toronto. I believe she's not invited, if I recall correctly. And I think it's unfortunate that I think there will be a breakthrough for the Green Party. If it doesn't happen this election, I think it'll happen next time. I think she's doing very well in not only holding her own, but I think she was, as I said before, she was the star of the first debate, I felt, in English. So, and then the Bloc Québécois, obviously, whether they come back or not, and it'll be interesting whether they'll be included in other debates and how seriously they'll be taken next time, because it looks like actually they're set to get 0 seats. So it'll be very interesting to see whether the Bloc is able to come back or will they be knocked to the chopping block. So, it remains to be seen. There's also the Marxist-Leninist Party and the Communist Party. You have a variety of small parties throughout Canada. We have the Rhinoceros Party is back in existence. They were quite amusing in the mid-'90s when they sort of came out of the constitutional debates that nearly destroyed the country at the time. So there are some little parties I would encourage some of our viewers to look into that they're in the game and they're not really getting much press. But it will be interesting to see whether the Bloc ceases to exist or it makes a comeback, or Elizabeth May is able to really bring it forward and actually entrench the Green Party as a legitimate national party.
So who's going to get more seats then, Guy? The Rhinoceros Party or the Bloc? Where's your money?
Well, I think of course the Bloc has more chances to get some seats than the Rhinoceros Party, no doubt about that. But is it a done deal for the Bloc to get some MPs back in there? It's not a done deal. Of course, the Bloc wants to have as much the MPs as possible. It's going to be a minority government. It's in every interest of every Quebecers to have strong representatives for their views, which we can see clearly that are different for many ways, especially on the value, the value kind of the slate thing. The niqab issue is a clear instance about some difference that we have. I think it's not fantasy to say that the number of 12 in order to have official recognitions is now kind of possible. It wasn't before the debate, but clearly Gilles Ducep's performance showed why he's there. He has a lot of good candidates, by the way, young candidates, some people of experience that are there. Which ones will have the call, we don't know. Elizabeth May, I agree. She should do better. She should have a breakthrough. Actually, they should consider having taking example for Quebec Solidaire here in Quebec, who has two leaders, two spokesperson, one who's a woman, one who's a man. It could help. Like I said earlier, if André Bellil would have been the one designated for this debate, would have been a totally different debate for the Green Party in Quebec. They should regard that, look at that seriously, because I think if they have, beside BC, where they could break through is in Quebec, they should look at that clearly in some way. But the Bloc, I think, could do some surprises. And there's one thing that Colin probably isn't aware. Even now, with the Bloc in its condition, there's 40% of people who would consider the independence of Quebec. It hasn't moved for the last 20 years. 40% of people here in Quebec consider that the independence of Quebec is an important issue and still is relevant. So it's not about the public, the eradication of the Bloc. If it's not there, the question, the issue will not go away.
Elizabeth May is being spoken of quite a bit tonight. She's the leader of the Green Party, a small party. Wouldn't she be better off joining one of the big three parties and taking the lead on their green issues?
No, it's an excellent question, Andrew. And, that is a question whether to be a single issue party. The Green Party traditionally has been one focused on the environment and has branched off into other social issues that it's sort of left of center party, obviously, just left of the NDP. But, how much water to put in your wine. That the Liberal Party of Canada, same with the NDP, has often taken up environmental issues. That there was the green shift under Dion, and as well the NDP is traditionally, though they're sort of waffling on pipelines, but certainly they've always tried to graft themselves onto those sort of issues. That's a great question. I feel she could perhaps actually have more influence if she were to put water in her wine and to say join as a prominent MP or a member of Parliament, or if there's a minority coalition. It'd be very interesting to see if Elizabeth May could be Minister of the Environment for whatever comes out October 19th. So I would say she should keep on going. That I think the Green Party is a very legitimate voice in politics in this country. I hope she keeps with it. I hope the Green Party does not cease to exist. I would love to see her join any government, or if there was a minority coalition, I would love to see her join that and have a prominent role in it.
Is there a position for her in a minority government, Guy, do you think? Is she good enough?
Well, let's be serious. Do you see Elizabeth May working with the Conservative on any issue? No. She had the line about the pipelines and the trains for regarding oil. The problem is not the trains or the pipelines. The problem is not the transportation. The problem is the product. So right off the bat, and that would be a problem with Tom Mulcair as well, because Tom Mulcair is very supportive of the oil industry, which is one of the breaking point here in Quebec, because here in Quebec we have absolutely no benefits about this issue, almost no benefits, and I would say more of a kind of a marriage of reason with the Liberal Party, especially regarding the previous incarnation where the Liberal Party of Stéphane Dion was almost a Green Party. It could work, but if we have, I think that if we have a minister of of environment that comes from another party, and let's say that we have Gilles Duceppe or someone else that who is elected, then we'd have to have, especially if we have a number of deputies or MPs in Quebec from the bloc, we'll have to find some kind of a way to integrate people from Quebec regarding issues strictly on Quebec. So yes, it's a very progressive idea. I like that, but only if there's some kind of way to recognize the duality of the nation of Quebec, because that's something that should be looked to as well.
Okay, so sticking with last week's debate. Now, federal election, Canada is a bilingual country. There's many thousands of French Canadians living in every province and territory, in addition to Quebec. So why weren't they really addressed at all during the recent French TV debate, Guy?
Well, that's a question that we should ask to the three major parties of the Bloc Canadien. Why don't they give more attention to 2 million of their citizens? It's not a small number. It's more or less 2 million of people who are considering themselves French-speaking. It's not the fight for the Bloc Québécois or for Quebec to take this on the table. We sympathize and wholeheartedly, because I have some people that some of my family that are Franco-Ontariens, and I know that for them the Harris years have been horrific for their rights and even their place in the Ontarian society, and I'm sure there are some fights all across Canada to bring that thing, and still French is one of the official language of Canada, so why?
Colin,
Why?
What do you think? The French Canadians in the other parts of Canada outside of Quebec were pretty much ignored during that debate. I think St. Boniface was mentioned once and New Brunswick was mentioned once by Justin Trudeau right towards the end of the debate. But other than that, they didn't get a look in. Why? Well,
it's funny that Guy sort of articulated the Bloc Canadien, which I guess is referring to, the major federalist parties, Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP, but I would push that back on sort of the nationalist framework in Quebec, that unfortunately, the nationalist framework usually defines Quebec as a French-speaking nation, quote-unquote, which excludes, of course, 20% of Quebecers that define their lives in a language that isn't French, and then, of course, you have, up to 2 million Canadians who define their lives in French outside of Quebec, in the rest of Canada. So, actually, I think it's often the nationalist framework in Quebec that has excluded them from really, I think, the French-Canadian nation, which I agree exists. I don't think there is a Quebec nation, which exists. There is a French-Canadian one. There is an English one. And
well, you were speaking about minorities earlier, so there you have it.
It's just a different conceptual framework that I would say it's actually the myths that have been propagated for the last 50 years have excluded French Canadians outside Quebec from certainly the Quebec mentality, and unfortunately has left them somewhat adrift, just as has left many English Quebecers adrift. So just to see it as and obviously I was disappointed that they were not brought up.
So the minority argument is okay for anything but French people, right?
No, I'm not. I don't think that's what I was trying to say. I think it's just the conceptual framework with you tackle the question. I have a different, I sort of have an opposing view that unfortunately they've been excluded from Quebec has defined its own identity as being French and solely bounded by the territory of Quebec, which I think
we've only been speaking French here for 400 years, so
yeah, of course.
Sorry about that.
Brunswick and St. Boniface, but to echo your disappointment that they weren't talked about, their issues for minority rights. You talked about Franco-Ontario's, that there was the Montfort Hospital that was nearly closed, which gave us a brilliant judgment from the Ontario Court of Appeals, which is very important for minority language rights. So I was disappointed they weren't spoken of enough. It's great that Justin Trudeau mentioned them, but it should have been much more than just a symbolic gesture. But yeah.
Okay, now we've got 2 or 3 weeks to go to the big day, and It's really close. The big three parties, it's close. It's tough at the top there. It's very, very close. But who's actually in the lead? Because I look at my social media feed, and I've got friends who support all manner of parties, and they all say that their leader won the debate, and our spokesman's better for this, etc., etc., etc. So if I listen to Guy, the Bloc's in the lead. If I listen to you, the Liberals are in the lead. If I listen to another friend, the Conservatives are in the lead. I mean, seriously, who's in the lead, really? Colin?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, it is a three-way horse race right now, and the NDP is very well entrenched in Quebec at about 50% of the polls. You really have Conservatives and Liberals battling out for the rest of Canada. It really is a three-way horse race. It looks like the Liberals are slightly in the lead with 32%, the NDP with 31%, Conservatives just below that with 29%, and then obviously the Bloc and NDP sort of overrepresented with 4 or 5% for the NDP, maybe up to 7%. And then 10 to 14% for the Bloc Québécois. So it's a three-way horse race, and it's the way and even with poll counts, with seat counts, it really is 115, 113, 109, or 110 that we don't know what it's going to look like on election day. But as I said to you, I think 2 times ago, is that I think we're going to have a new prime minister on October 19th or just shortly after. We don't know who it's going to be. Harper's not going to get a majority government, so he's going to be either resign or be forced out very quickly after the election, or it'll be Thomas Mulcair or Justin Trudeau. So we're looking at a new prime minister. I think Canadians, I'm excited about it personally. I'm very much looking forward to putting the Harper years behind us, but we're looking at a new prime minister, and we don't know who it's going to be. It's very exciting.
Guy, who's going to win this? Who's in the lead right now?
Oh boy.
That's why you're here. That's why you're here. We need an answer. Come on.
Actually, I think right now the Joker's in the lead. Literally, it's. I clearly, actually, I think that there are several countries right now who are into elections. When I spoke earlier, the first time I went to this show, I spoke about the need for Canada to redefine itself and its most profound democratic foundations. About having more autonomy for the different regions of Canada. And I think what's happening right now is clearly putting that into perspective. Because if you look at it, there's a race in BC. There's a race. Actually, there's no race in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It's pretty much conservative all the way, but that's okay. It's their choice. They have their regional issues that they have responded like that. Same thing in BC, where we have the Greens and Elizabeth May that are probably much more into effect than anywhere else. Then you have Ontario. Ontario, it's red or blue. No questions about that. Even if Mulcair is trying to get some wins there, it won't work. Then we have Quebec. Quebec, it's a whole different ball game. Everybody knows that. And in the Maritimes, again, it's another race where we have the red, the blues, and with issues that are very different from all across the country. So who's in the lead right now? I don't like to see like that. That's one of the things that I don't like about the political, and I'm speaking from my personal point of view. It's not the Blocist that is speaking. Is that we have a system, a political system, which is a remnant of our colonial history, and which is supposed to be played like a game of hockey. Democracy is not a game of hockey, and we are seeing this right now. We need some major changing, especially in the voting system. We need to have a part of proportionality, not only the unilateral polling system that we have, because we are, as a nation, either Quebec or Canada, getting to maturity. We are not what we are. We have a lot of different issues all across Canada, and I think there's something we'll have to do. But to go back to the question, who's in the lead right now? In Quebec, I think it's a three-way race. I don't think that the Liberal Party is in the game right now. But all across Canada, I think we have a three-way race, and I agree with you, Colin. It will be a minority government. And this is why in Quebec it is now a different ballgame, because a lot of people are realizing that it will be a minority government, and that for Quebec, in order to have its voice being heard, the Bloc is there.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I want to just touch on something that we spoke about last week, actually. If you recall, the NDP, for a small fee, it's around $50, something like that, were allowing supporters to put messages on official campaign posters in Stephen Harper's riding. Now, loads of them did it, and it's perfectly legitimate, and the messages were... they weren't rude, they weren't illegal or anything like that. Now, and it was a nice way for the NDP to raise a few funds for their local candidate. But these signs, which obviously they made national news, as they would because it was in Stephen Harper's riding, so it was basically send a message to Stephen Harper. Now, the city removed all of these signs, allegedly due to an error. Colin, now these signs we spoke about last week, they've been removed due to an error. Really? What do you think?
There could be administrative errors, and you have to assume good faith. That's one thing I love about the Civil Code of Quebec, is that, we have to assume good faith on behalf of all actors. And that happened to me in 2008. I put up signs of the Liberal Party in parts of Lennoxville and Sherbrooke, and they got taken down. It was really just that we violated some traffic bylaw. You couldn't put them at certain intersections, etc., where we thought the other team had taken them down because conservative signs had gone up in their place, and it was just a mistake on behalf of the transportation authorities taking them down, the other party putting them up in our place, getting them taken down. It was sort of this funny little whodunit scenario. So I'm assuming good faith on this.
But hang on a minute. These were official NDP signs, branded as NDP. We're in an election period, perfectly legal signs, and city employees have removed them. I mean, surely that's deliberate.
It does smell a bit rotten to be a certain extent, but I do assume good faith that I think those gentlemen are probably doing their job. So that's my assessment. But it was sort of in the heart of conservative country. Those were attacks on Stephen Harper. Maybe they weren't taken too well. So
okay, fair enough. Guy, was that done in good faith, do you think?
Well, I agree with Colin, and I find it funny bringing the good faith example, because that's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. But it does smell very fishy. And actually, I thought it was a brilliant idea about bringing the Joe Citizen, Joe Canadian, Joe Calgary to have his say about this guy who's been representing him not only as a PM but as his regional or closest MP. And actually, there's something a little bit similar that was done here in Quebec City in the riding of Louis Saint Laurent, where Gérald Dettel is one star candidate for Harper. And the Bloc, what they did is that they made some extra little posters that were supposed to go right under the posters from the Bloc, and the Conservatives and the NDP. They didn't do one for the Liberals. I don't know why. Maybe they don't think it's in the equation. But they were blue for Conservatives, a darker blue for the Bloc, and orange for the NDP. And what they said is that this candidate is in support of Quebec dependency. I don't think that's the correct English word. And those for the Bloc were saying this candidate supports the independence of Quebec. And I thought I just thought it worth mentioning because they were just left there, and it just...
So they didn't get removed?
No, I don't think so. Well, I've seen a few disappear.
Not by city employees, then?
No. That's a very, very concerning point about this issue.
Okay, gentlemen, we're out of time. Thanks very much for joining us. And Colin, all the best. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andrew. Pleasure.
Guy, thank you very much.
Pleasure speaking with you, Colin. It was great as much as the first time. I hope we do it again, Colin.
For sure. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with you again next week.
Thank you for listening to a Life in Quebec podcast. For more news, editorials, and opinion, visit lifeinquebec.com.